Despite my Soulblight Gravelords army being finished for close to 2 years now, maybe even 3, you still haven't seen all of it, so let's fix that now, shall we? This is my Soulblight Gravelords army, and I think a lot of why I enjoy making Cosmic Horror Mega Gargants has come from this force, because there are a few things in here that frankly no one of sane mind would have actually tried to do or bothered doing, whichever way you look at it, and I really enjoyed the process of making just weird stuff. A big part of this army, as you can see from the wolves that are currently rotating in front of your very eyes, is mushrooms. Now, I know mushrooms are typically like a Gloomspite Gits territory, but I kind of liked the idea of there being an undead army that had like a Cordyceps thing going on, and it also gave me a good excuse for doing weird stuff, because whether this is accurate or not, I'm not a partaker myself, but in pop culture at least, mushrooms do hallucinatory things, right? So I like the idea of an army where, is it that the person who's looking at them is hallucinating all the mushrooms? Is it they actually do have all the mushrooms? Are the things you're seeing real, or are they not real? I liked that idea, and the fact that it meant that they are no less real because they're still there and they're still trying to kill you. I don't know. I thought that was fun. Big part of this army came from the box of goodies that was sent to me via Artis Opus, which had like ferns and mushrooms in it. And that kind of very much dictated the overall theme of this army, and I don't think I would have gone quite as wild with it if I hadn't been presented with that. For the wolves, that just meant stuff growing out of them. Stuff growing out of them, things like extra arms appearing on some of them. Did they actually have those arms, or did they not have those arms? Who knows? They don't know. The people who are fighting them don't really know. They just know that there's a bunch of undead wolves trying to eat them. The fact that the Soulblight Gravelords Die Wolves are already fantastic, I don't know, it's such a good kit. It's a really good kit. There are repeated poses, but I love the detail of just the raw flesh, the bits of decay, the skin that's coming off of the bone in certain places, like birds picking bits of their flesh off them. They already look kind of trippy. They already have, like, I would suggest kind of almost an Annihilation feel. Like, you know the bear from Annihilation? Love it. Absolutely love the bear. They kind of remind me of that, which I know they're just undead wolves, but there's just something about the aesthetic that felt kind of similar in a way. Trying to make 20 different wolves look unique was a bit of a challenge, and I don't think I managed it, but there's enough variation in there that I don't tend to get bored looking at them when they're on the tabletop. I had a similar approach with the fell bats as well. The fell bats, I just wanted them to look extra weird, so just having bats wasn't enough. I needed some undead stuff in there that wasn't beast related. So a few skulls instead of heads, using like the torsos of Deadwalker zombies. Just things to make them look extra trippy and extra odd. And again, it was trying to like separate them out a little bit and make them look a bit different. There's only 6 of them, but I have a real issue with like mass repetition when it comes to any army, really. I'm even guilty of it when it comes to my armoured company. I can't just let a Leman Russ be a Leman Russ. It's got to look slightly different to the Leman Russ next to it. Why? I don't know, but it just feels like it has to be. And I mean, even when it comes to 6 Fellbats, I had to do something to split them up a little bit, so we ended up with a collection of just really weird looking flying creatures. Don't really look like bats anymore. They've got the wings, but yeah. I have to admit that the corpse cart really didn't need to look any different to a normal corpse cart. In fact, it was kind of supposed to be that to start out with, but then I looked at Gorslav the Gravekeeper and went, well, I kind of want him to be involved in the corpse cart. He looks great. He's got the shovel, he's leaving up the lid of a coffin. We can make him look a bit extra weird. I gave him a couple of candles on his back and an additional head. I like the idea of there being 2 of them kind of mushed together. And I also realised that I'd kind of used parts of the corpse cart for other projects. I'd got it for this and then not really used it correctly. I'd taken parts off and given them to other models. I used parts of the actual wooden section of the corpse cart to make a weird Wendigo looking thing from one of the Cursed City models. And so in the end I dug out an old brazier from another kit and decided that, well, if I don't have the cart itself, what I could do is just have all the bodies in the cart holding the fire. Since it is a balefire corpse cart, it made sense to do it that way, but it only made sense because I'd mangled the actual model like a silly person. To be fair though, I think it looks more menacing than a normal corpse cart, and I did make it so that you can get Gorslav out of the base. He's on his own base, he's on a little stepped area, and he can just be removed if you actually want to play Cursed City. So I'm really happy with how that came out. It was just born out of necessity more than anything else, because I did a silly thing. In building the list for this army, it was pointed out to me that whilst I could have nothing but giant monsters, it was also helpful to have things like, a screen, like actual infantry. Things to stop other things from just charging 4 big monsters and killing them outright. So, begrudgingly, that's what I went for. That's why I have the 20 wolves and the 6 fellbats. Admittedly, the 20 wolves is interesting because I have 20 because of this guy, Radikar the Beast. Radikar the Beast allows you to summon 10 wolves once he's on the field, and so he just kind of brings his own separate little screen that you can set up after the fact, and I really, really like that. But again, I wanted him to fit more with the rest of the army, which was quite monstrous and quite creepy, and Radikar the Beast has a very different feel to like Laukavai and things like the Zombie Dragon or the Terrorgeist. So, obviously, removing his head, giving him a big like horned horse's head, giving him a big axe even though he's only got claws, and removing his little retainers, one of which is holding a cup up to the blood on his hand, which I kind of do like, but it didn't fit with the rest of this army. So instead, he's just got some blood dripping down and a couple of weird freaks keeping him company. I realised very belatedly that I didn't put any actual mushrooms or ferns on him, but I don't think he really needs it. I think just he fits in pretty well without it, and the fact that he's got a skull for a head makes him line up with the rest of the force pretty well. Now, a big part of converting this army was Laukavai, and I didn't know what I wanted to do with that. I just knew that I didn't want to do what everyone else was doing, which was leaving her standard or giving her a pair of legs and just turning the lower half of her into a different model. Like, a lot of people did like a almost dismounted Laukavai, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted something, again, extra creepy and weird, so I had an extra box of fellbats, so I moved the wings from the beastie onto her, then gave her a couple of extra wings as though they're just sort of constantly growing out of her, and I really wanted to do something with the lower half that was still unnerving but wasn't the standard model. And I hate spirit hosts, right? I don't like spirit hosts. They're one of the worst models to build. They're super simple, at least they should be, but they're not. But they do have a nice kind of twisty, because they're like spinny ghosts, spinny angry ghosts, I thought to myself, well, maybe if we put those coming out of her torso, it'll look like there's just tendrils of blood and gore that are just constantly spilling out from her, and she uses those to move around, or, she kind of hovers or flies with her messed up wings, and there's just this constant tornado of viscera under her, and it worked. It kind of worked. I used a bit from Lady Ollander, I think it was, to make a nice raggedy cloak behind her to give the feeling of movement, as though she's passing over that little bit of wall and she's kind of moving towards stuff. It was weird, and I wasn't really sure if it would work, but it came out okay. I actually really enjoyed painting this model as well. Laukavai and Radikar the Beast, I had an absolute blast painting. They were really, really fun. Now, when it came to the Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon, because you got to take one of those because they're great, I may have gone a bit overly silly and weird with it. I just felt like it needed something more, and the rest of the army had been shaping up to be this kind of hallucinatory weirdness, and I didn't want to put the Vampire Lord on the Zombie Dragon necessarily as much as have the Vampire Lord be the Zombie Dragon. So I thought it would be fun if I stuck, again, like sticking with the torso feel of it. Like Laukavai has got a monstrous lower body, so I took away her monstrous lower body and gave her a bunch of blood and guts and weird blood energy. But I kind of wanted to still do something where there was like a vampire monster hybrid, and the Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon became that because I did basically what Games Workshop did with Laukavai and just put the torso on the neck of the Zombie Dragon, but then it didn't look right. It felt like it needed something else, so naturally I put a load of hands and arms hanging down from the torso as though they're kind of reaching out to grab things underneath it, which a lot of people didn't like that. Quite a few comments from people I've played against with this army who were like, oh god, why? And the answer is, I don't know, it just seemed like a good idea at the time, and maybe I was wrong? I don't think I was wrong, but maybe I was. Something that was definitely wrong with this particular thought, by the way, was the fact that doing that means the blood lance sticks out really far at the front, which is a real shame, because the wings on the zombie dragon stick out really far to the back and the sides. So what you've effectively got there is a model that is way bigger than the base it's on. Way bigger, to an absurd degree. It's so hard to actually play games with, because you end up just spearing stuff. You can't move it without knocking everything else over, because it overhangs so badly. If I'm being completely honest, by the time I got to the Terrorgeist, I was kind of running out of ideas a bit, and I wanted to do something totally different to the Vampire Lord. So I did initially think of giving it 2 heads and no wings, but it has fly as a keyword, and I kind of felt like it needed to still be recognisable from a distance, and a wingless Terrorgeist is not going to be easy to identify when you're just looking at a 2,000 point game in a tournament setting, which is what this army was built for. It was built to take to Facehammer for my first ever tournament, and also first time playing Age of Sigmar, and it needed to be more recognisable than taking off the wings and giving it 2 heads. So it kept the wings, but I did give it 2 heads because I had a spare head from the Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon. I felt like that was a nice way to just add a little bit extra to it, and still recognisable along with everything else. Like, Laukavai might look weird, but she still looks like Laukavai. Radikal the Beast, still recognisable, so are the bats. The Corpse Cart, different, but, once you point it out, it makes sense. I didn't want the Terrorgeist to really properly depart from that and make it impossible to tell what it is. I mean, I did that time. The Cosmic Horror Mega Gargants, obviously, none of them look like anything, so that attitude fell off like a year later. But for this army, just something simple. Something simple like an extra head and a few mushrooms out of one of the eyes. It worked. It worked well for the rest of the force, I think. And finally, the Zombie Dragon. The Zombie Dragon was originally going to be just another Games Workshop Zombie Dragon. That's what I'd planned for, and I'd bought 3 of them. One for the Vampire Lord, one for the Terrorgeist, one for the Zombie Dragon. But I've had this Plague Dragon, I believe it's called, from Creature Caster for years. I'd had it for years by the time this army came around, and I'd never painted it. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know what colour scheme to go for. I didn't feel confident that I could do it justice because it's such a good model. I just put off painting it for so long because I was scared of it. I was intimidated by this model, especially since it went out of production not that long after I bought it, if I remember correctly. So I had this thing that I knew people wanted and people liked, and I just never felt like I was going to be able to paint it in such a way that made it look good. And so it just sat on a shelf, and I just didn't touch it. I didn't dare. And then when it came to this army, I just thought to myself, you know what? If I don't paint this now, if I don't do something with it, it's going to be sat here for decades. I'm never going to touch it, or I'm going to sell it, then I'm going to regret it because I love the model. So let's include it in this army. It's a zombie dragon. It looks like a zombified dragon. It fits, it works. You've already got the base for it that will, work properly for this model. So just do it. You've got a colour scheme. You've painted all the other stuff. You need to paint this model, include it in the army. Let's go. And in the end, it took 3 days to paint it, I think it was. 2 or 3 days. But I did it. I had this model that has been sat there for God knows how long, and it was finally done. And I don't know, it was a proud moment. Genuinely a proud moment, because it was such an illogical thing to be worried about and to put off for so long. Realistically, if you paint something you don't like how it's painted, you can strip it and start again. But for some reason, that never felt an option with this thing. But having then done this army, it just made sense to throw it in there and get it finished. And I've been super happy with it since. I really have. Painting this army was fun because it was the first time I'd sat down and used an airbrush in any real way. I'd learned to use one, but a lot of this army was painted using the airbrush. All the wings, all the base shades and colours and stuff, all the lighting and things, it was all done using an airbrush, and then I actually used streak and grime over the top of what I'd airbrushed. So I'd airbrush lighter spots and highlights and the like, and then I used streak and grime over the top, and then I would go back and wash the streak and grime away, leaving only some of it, and it kind of resulted in this fairly muted kind of brown to cream sort of colour scheme, which I really liked, and I felt it fit the army pretty well, but it needed colour. It needed a spot colour really badly because it was very monotone, and it didn't pop very much when you looked at it. And outside of like dry brushing some edges and stuff to lighten them up, I was a little bit stumped until I decided that actually, well, we've got the mushrooms. If the mushrooms are a nice bright colour, and then we make them glow on the ground, that'll add a lot of colour to it. So that's exactly what I did. I just got some ink. I think it's a Daler-Rowney ink, a turquoise ink, and then I just airbrushed that onto anything that looked like it should glow. Any like fungus, any ferns, they were given that like fairly vibrant colour, and then I just sprayed around it to make a bit of very lazy OSL. But I kind of liked the fact that it looked a bit duller and a bit darker and like it shouldn't really work. It kind of felt unnatural doing it that way. And yeah, I mean, the end result is that when you see it on the tabletop, it is quite muted, apart from these bright spots that just draw your eye to these things that look like they shouldn't really be there. And kind of once you see where they're poking out of, it kind of leads the eye to other places. I mean, it was done very quickly. This army was painted in like a couple of weeks before the tournament, but I've not felt the need to go back and correct or change anything really. I've just been pretty happy with how it's turned out, you know? So there you go, there's my collection, my cavalcade of weird mushroomy freaks. I absolutely love that army. I enjoyed making it, I enjoyed painting it. Obviously a lot of it just wasn't really possible without the help of Artis Opus, so there's a massive debt of gratitude there. The whole mushroom hallucination Cordyceps thing, it just kind of gave me what I needed to tie everything together. I mean, you can get away with a lot when what you're looking at is supposed to be hallucinatory weirdness, and I really feel like a lot of it ended up being pretty hallucinatory and weird, but that's exactly what I wanted to do, especially the little hands. The little hands under the Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon, I'm still super happy with that, even though pretty much everyone who's seen that so far has asked what is wrong with me, which is a fair question, and I do not have the answer. But there you go. Soulblight Gravelords, let me know what you think of that army in the comments down below. Don't go too wild, I'm still pretty happy with it. Don't knock me down too many pegs, alright? As always, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you for the next one.